Hello listeners, and welcome to Plugged In, the energy news podcast from Montel, where we bring you the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. We're recording this episode just as power has returned to Spain and parts of Portugal and France, following the mass blackouts that happened on Monday. Whilst investigations are currently underway to understand what caused the power outage that brought transport, businesses and airports to a standstill, we are turning our attention to another prominent news story, which is causing much debate among Europe's energy industry leaders this week. That is the bidding zone review published by European TSOs earlier this week. I'm going to be speaking to Aurora Energy Research, Danish TSO Energinet, and Montel's own Tobias Federico. But first, I'm joined by our Brussels correspondent, Siobhan Hall, who can tell us more. A warm welcome to you, Siobhan.
Thank you, Richard.
So, Siobhan, what's exactly been released from ENTSO-E and how long have we been waiting for this?
Oh, well, what has been released is a study that has been undertaken by Sverrisson transmission system operators on whether power bidding zones should be changed, and if they should, how they should be changed. And they looked at very specific incidences, very specific areas, and the ones that are most relevant are they looked at Germany and Sweden. And we have been waiting for this for years. It has been delayed several times. It's something that's been in the making for many years. So to actually have the final report, I imagine is essentially a relief to nearly everyone involved in it.
Absolutely. So what countries would be affected the most by a proposed changing to the bidding zones, also known as price zones?
So the study was looking at several possible new configurations of bidding zones. And what the final recommendations came out was that they decided that the existing Swedish system setup is fine. So that doesn't need any changing. But the German system, which is currently one price zone with Luxembourg, according to the calculations they did, they recommended that the most efficient way to organize the German-Luxembourg price zone would be to split it into 5 zones.
And what's likely to happen over the coming 6 months? Because nothing's going to happen overnight, but it may take months or years before we see any changes, if we do see them at all.
Exactly. So this study is part of a legal process that has very defined timelines in it. I say that, but this study was delayed several times before it was published, so it did not meet its own defined legal timelines. What is supposed to happen is the publication of this study starts a 6-month clock countdown. And within that 6 months, the government's involved. So in this case, it's going to be the German government, I presume the Luxembourg government, but essentially the German government will have to come within 6 months with a decision whether it wants to reconfigure the bidding zones as recommended in this study, or if it wants to go for an alternative plan. And then depending on what it decides, it then has further months in order to make those changes or come up with an alternative plan.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Siobhan. To delve further into this matter and hopefully have a lively discussion, I'm pleased to be joined by Casimir Lorenz, who's Managing Director for Central Europe at Aurora Energy Research, Morten Pindstrup, International Chief Engineer at Energinet, the Danish TSO, and our very own Tobias Federico, who's Chief Product Manager at Montel. A very warm welcome to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Thank you.
Casimir, now let's start with you. Why is the splitting of the German bidding price zone such a contentious issue?
It has massive implications. I think it has implications on the power sector, but it has implication also on potentially day-to-day life. That's why it's also a very political topic. Furthermore, I think it's a political topic because it comes back to the federal nature of Germany with having different federal states and therefore also different interests. So it can easily get into a situation where people think they might be worse off. And this is also one important thing that we need to solve when we want to make a successful bidding zone split. We need to ensure that everybody has the feeling they're profiting from it and nobody's structurally worse off.
Absolutely. And Tobias, if we stick with Germany, obviously you're based in Germany. What are your views? Why is the potential splitting of the German price zone so problematic?
Well, Casimir already said a few really good arguments. I think the problem of splitting a zone has some additional costs and also some additional stress, which are not covered in the study from the NSOE. When you come to hedging strategies, hedging approaches, what products to trade, how to change the system, that is much more on the wholesale, on the trading side. But when it comes to the political part and the sentiment within Germany, splitting up Germany, we had some histories on that, and I don't think we want to repeat that again. So that's why it's very political and very emotional, the discussion.
I think certainly the response amongst German politicians has been that we are not splitting the zone, but we'll come to that later. But Morten, what's your view as a TSO? Why has NSOE, which is the European body of TSOs, come to this decision to split it in up to 5 zones?
I think we come to a decision to split. I think we have to be careful about the phrasing of this. The history is that with the introduction of the electricity market regulation in 2019, there is an article that very specifically asks us to develop a methodology within 3 months, and then within 12 months, I'm saying here almost 5 years later, we should make a bidding zone study assessing the structural congestions in the system and come up with alternatives if necessary. And just creating the methodology was difficult. It is highly technical. It requires modeling a lot of the processes that happens in the electricity markets today among TSOs, RCCs, power exchanges, and all this coming together then ends up in a result where we are assessing 22 different parameters, among which economic efficiency is one, CO2 emissions, and a lot of other things. So when we sum that up according to the methodology, then we are obligated to come with a recommendation, which are for the 2 studies that are done, one for continental Europe and one for the Nordics, is that there is economic benefit of splitting Germany and Holland, as I remember it. And in the Nordic case, we have not been able to prove that any of the configurations assessed led to an increased economic efficiency. So I think it is difficult for us as TSOs because we can look at the technical part, but that is only a part of the solution or of the discussion, as both Casimir and Tobias are mentioning. I think one of the points that I usually make is when we discuss this about splitting Germany, is that, well, while we can look at it on a technical perspective and economics and power markets, if we end up in a situation where it means that industry is worse off, then it becomes an industry policy discussion. It becomes a social policy discussion. And when it becomes that, then energy very easily loses out because it's much more hard to understand that part, and the other parts are very present for everyone.
I think you're making some very valid points, and not least, it's not a decision as such. I think you're right in pointing that it's a recommendation based on the TSO modification. So thank you for that clarification, Morten. But Casimir, if I can turn to you, what would be the other reasons to favour a split in Germany, and especially into so many zones? It's not just one, or there's not just 2, but there are several that's being recommended here.
Yeah, and maybe also making clear that what I said in the beginning, I think that's why there's such a big discussion about it. But that's, for me, honestly, not a reason not to do it, because I think there are options to overcome these problems, and happy to go a bit more detail into this ones to overcome the problems. But maybe starting with why I see it's important to split, or where are the benefits of splitting a zone? For me, there are two things. One is the dispatch, so how power plants are used, how power plants are turned on and turned off. And the other thing is how in new power plants, can also be renewables, the investments are happening. There is an impact on the investment from a price zone split, but that's not the key thing that we need to solve. Where we have a lot of other options to steer investments. A lot of investments are anyhow not fully market driven in Germany, but the key thing is that we have a correct dispatch, and with a correct dispatch, I mean that we have a correct dispatch signal. And what is the dispatch signal? That is the price. And if the price leads to a wrong dispatch, and happy to go into details what I mean with this in a second, this is something which I find very dangerous. One example is that we are seeing very low or even negative prices in Germany, which is a sign or a signal for flexible assets to increase consumption. That can be batteries, but that can also be EVs. That also is a signal to export electricity to our neighbors, right? Because it's cheap for them to buy it. However, if this low prices that we're seeing are actually not low prices everywhere in Germany, but only in the north and not in the south, that can get dangerous, because if we have a situation, for example, with a lot of wind production in the north, in the winter, that's a very common situation, low PV production in the south, we will often see low to even negative prices. And then all this additional consumption will be brought up because the prices are so low, and we're making this a bottleneck between north to south transmission capacity even worse. So we are adding demand, we are exporting to our southern neighbors because of these low prices for the entirety of Germany, while these low prices are actually only relevant for the northern part of Germany. And in the southern part of Germany, we don't have excess electricity. We don't have that cheap electricity. And this all has a lot of additional effects, right? In these moments, we turn on storages, we export electricity, and because we can't transport this electricity from north to south, we're turning on thermal power plants in the south, turning down renewables in the north, and still exporting this electricity more or less for free to our neighbors. And yeah, that's something that we definitely need to solve. And a price zone split, a bidding zone split, can be one solution. It is, in my view, the best solution to address this problem. There are alternative solutions, which will always be a second best solution. I don't know if we have time to discuss them today, but like solving this dispatch problem is my key issue. And if somebody says we should not do bidding zone splits, good arguments against it, as we discussed, then I would like to hear what are the alternatives to solving this problem with the controlling the dispatch.
I mean, Tobias, I don't know if you're in the right position to answer what the correct dispatch signal or how you solve that problem, but you mentioned liquidity, or you mentioned hedging and price zones. The difficulty of hedging, we've seen this been a constant debate in the Nordics as well. When you have so many price zones, it's very difficult to hedge by production and consumption. But the TSOs also mentioned that in their solutions, liquidity would be hit.
Well, it will. I mean, it's a quite easy one that the bigger price zone is, the bigger the liquidity will be. The smaller price zone is, if you split the products up into 5 different products, the liquidity of each product will be definitely lower. That's a no-brainer. I mean, one solution could be, as it has done in the Nordics with the EPADs or the contracts of differences between a zonal price. So let's say a German one zone price and 5 other zones. The big difference is, and that's something which often is ignored, is the fact that most of the trading and hedging strategies is done OTC bilaterally with forward contracts. And the main reason for that is that most of the industrials and German municipalities are not allowed to trade futures, because marginal accounting, which is part of the future contract, where you have this daily cash settlement, is not allowed for them. Which means if we would have a contract for difference, or so-called EPAD, how it's called in the Nordics, for a German solution, that will be purely financial hedging instrument. and financial hedging instruments are not allowed by German municipalities and by industries. They could do it. They could open marginal accountings, but it will increase hugely their liquidity risk, their cash flow risk. And we've seen that in the past. And that is also one of the reasons why in Germany, or for German hedging strategies, only 20% are exchange-driven, which are mostly then financial futures. So what on paper could work, in theory and practice wouldn't work and would cause a lot of problem. This is one thing. The other thing is, of course, then, which has been covered a bit in the study, it's the market power. If you're the smaller the zone you make, the higher you have the probability of having market players who have local market.
So what would you say then, Tobias? Then just to explain, why is it the municipalities? Is it law that they can't engage in the trading of futures because that's kind of speculative action? Then they become financial traders. Is that some of the reason?
Well, that could be one. That's a topic where I'm not very familiar with. But what I know most from the procurement strategies is that it is seen as a financial instrument. And they could do it. It's not really by law, but the risk committees of the German municipalities, because of the fact that it's in public ownership, they would like to avoid these type of products. Does not mean that they're not allowed to do it. There are some municipalities doing it, but the majorities of them try to avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen some instances, certainly in the Nordics as well, where a lot of these municipalities or smaller companies have been exposed to these massive price fluctuations and huge margin calls. But Morten, before I ask you to respond to what Tobias is saying and the issues around liquidity and hedging, this bidding zone review has taken years and years. I think you mentioned 2019, but I'm sure I heard about it in 2014 or beyond, before then. Could you explain why it's taken so long to come to pass or to come to light with the recommendations? And why? And something about the data and the validity of the data, because some people are calling that into question as well, how valid that could be.
Yeah. I can try. It's not very simple. Well, first of all, the methodology, it should take 3 months according to the regulation. I imagine it took a year and a half. The TSOs made a proposal, submitted it to ESA as per regulation. It was a little delayed, as I remember it. Then ESA were not happy, so they rewrote the methodology. It went into consultation. It had to make decisions, so it took a lot longer. So when we started the study, we should have almost been finished already. Then we had to find out what to assess. So how do we find out which configurations? Well, we did this LMP analysis where ESA was very much involved as well, and based on that, we found out, well, there are these configurations that had to be narrowed down, and then you had sort of the starting point. Then we needed to collect data. This is already maybe 3 years ago. That took some time, making sure that all the data is consistent and it's collected in a consistent manner across all the member states that are involved. Then when you start modeling, you find errors in the data, you find out settings in the model chain. The model chain takes a long time to run through. You have to do capacity calculation, you have to do the allocation, you have to do security analysis, you have to do remedial actions optimization, and only then can you actually assess this redispatch need that has to outweigh the over-optimization that 2 large bidding zones is. And that's basically the 2 main components that you hold up against each other to find out what is the economic potential. So this long model chain, and every time you find just a tiny error, then you have to start all the way back. And then you have to rerun all the scenarios, all the climate years, and it takes weeks to run all these things. So it is immensely complex. And I think that is often forgotten. We are following very strictly this methodology that we were in the end given. And that just takes an enormous amount of time. I think one of the points that we can take from this is that maybe there is, due to the comments that I've seen several people make, that the data is outdated. Well, if the process is so complex that it takes us years to do the computations, then per definition, the results that come out can't be recent, based on recent data. It's just not possible. So somewhere something might have to give. And you could argue at least whether the model chain is so detailed and complex, does it fit with our ability to forecast what the power system is in the next 5 and 10 years? Because that's what we're modeling.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a very important point. I'm also intrigued on your view. I mean, Sweden recently cancelled a power interconnector to Germany because it said it wouldn't do anything of the sort until Germany split its power market now into several bidding zones. How does splitting Germany up affect the Danish power market, for example?
Well, if we imagine Germany was split tomorrow, basically the northern part of Germany is likely to get, on average, quite a bit lower prices. That's what the study shows. That carries into Denmark as well, especially Jutland, but Zealand as a little as well. So it will put a downward pressure on the prices, especially when we have excess renewables in the system. And that is very correlated between Denmark and Germany in most cases. So the prices will become lower in the low-priced hours and will likely to be the same in let's say, the hours where we have less renewables on the system, because it's driven by the same technologies these days. It is gas generally that sets the price. So I think we would see downward pressure, which will be a challenge for the remaining thermal generators on the system, but also for the economic feasibility of some of the renewable projects that we have on the system already.
Absolutely. So that's also could be quite problematic on those fronts. Casimir, I think I'd like you also to provide some alternatives to the dispatch price signals, or the price signals for dispatching power production. But maybe you want to come and have a view on what's being said so far.
Yeah, maybe quick one on the Danish and quick also on the liquidity. I think the example for Denmark just showed that Denmark has similar generation asset types than northern Germany, but not than southern Germany. And this is also why we have, in a situation where we are having a lot of wind production in Denmark and in northern Germany, we will end up with Denmark exporting to Germany because there might be a price differential. Germany having a higher price, and but we actually can't transport this electricity from northern Germany to southern Germany. So it might even result in a situation where we are we're importing electricity from Denmark from a wind farm. Let's say it's not that simple, but we're importing electricity from Denmark, mainly wind production. We can't transport from northern to southern Germany, so we are curtailing German wind farms and increasing again potentially southern coal or gas power plants to then export the electricity even further to Italy or first to Austria, but maybe then even further. So this is really a situation as an economist, my heart is bleeding when hearing about that. Of course, there are liquidity issues we need to take into account. And personally, I think a 5-zone split is maybe shooting a bit too far. With a 2-zone split, this difference in generation type of assets and so forth is already much better addressed with the 1-zone. And with a 2-zone split, market liquidity issues are also significantly less of an issue than with 5 zones. So I'm also happy to hear from you, Tobias, what do you think if a 2-zone split with still two very, very large zones, if you compare to the rest of Europe, would give you the same headaches, because this would solve, at least from my perspective, this at least 80 to 90% of the issues that I've laid out. And whether it's a 1-2 zone or 5 zone, I would be happy with 2 zones.
Absolutely. Before I turn to Tobias, I'd just like to ask you, Casimir, would regional zones, so you go cross-border zones, so you have a French-German, or, not just, it's all, price then seems to be very national focus at the moment. But if, obviously, you have Germany, Luxembourg, of course, but if you, like a German, a Northern German Danish, or Northern German Dutch or something, would that also be a possibility here?
Yeah, the question is, most of our price zones are historically driven. That's why they're also close to how borders are there. And even if we have price zones, as long as there's enough transmission capacity, different price zones still have the same price. So we're not, it always sounds like we're splitting things and you can't exchange electricity and you have immediately different prices. You only have different prices in the moments when the physics are not working out anymore. That's why I'm also generally very pro towards more grid build out, and having more interconnection is favorable and something we should all strive for. But while the physics are not delivering that, we need to have a alternative setup which is not, say, violating physics and we're just causing a lot of cost in the system. But generally, I don't see a problem with regards to having also non-national price zones.
Tobias, so I'm sure you have a view on what's been said so far, but I'd also like to ask you, what are the next steps? I mean, the signals from the German government is very clear, but then don't they need to provide some alternatives or some other ways of dealing with the clear congestion and the clear issues that exist within Germany there, Tobias?
Yeah, that's absolutely a fact. We have the so-called redispatch cost. We have certain bottlenecks in the system. The cause of the bottlenecks are, I think, two. One is really building up grid capacities. That was always the plan since 10, 15 years, but it takes a long time. And especially when we have been building up these AC grids, AC cables in Germany, at least that was the plan. And that could have solved a few of those problems, increasing the grid capacities. When it came to a quite simple explanation, why do we want to build up this one AC cable, or it was 3 back in the days, from the north to the south? I was always explained, well, you can divide Germany into 3 belts. We have a wind belt in the north, we have a solar belt in the south, and we have a thermal power plant in the middle. And according to the laws of Kirchhoff, the thermal power plant in the middle disturbs the flow from north to south. This is also one reason, in combination with the grid itself. So the German government, I think the new German government, hopefully this by the end of this week, then must provide a solution. And one is, of course, building up power plant capacities in the right regions, thermal power plant capacities. That could help. But it doesn't help really if we have high wind in the north and low, so PV in the south. That is clear. And we must speed up the building up the grid. And that is a bit of a challenge. One was the cost question. We see that infrastructure costs have been quite high. The part of building up grid capacities in Germany should have been mostly underground so that nobody sees it to get public acceptance, but it was too expensive and took too long time. So a quicker solution would be great. And for me, and also for the German government, the first alternative is build the damn cables. I mean, that would have been the best way. If that really goes in the right speed, that's an interesting question. One is clear, when the Nordic started up with the zonal splittings back in the days, the argument was, with a price difference, there is an incentive to build up grid capacities between the north and the south. And I think this was 25 years ago, and I haven't seen any lot of cables being built up from North Norway to South Norway. So I don't see that the price zone split would really lead to new grids. We need really to invest that, so the government must incentivize that. And I'm against any type of splitting, Casimir, because we will have the issues anyhow. We will have, first of all, the unwinding of the different hedging strategies. There will be not a perfect hedge. I think liquidity will be okay with 2 zones. But the thing is that we will have a high price zone and a low price zone. Of course, Morten, we can discuss if the price levels are correct or not. and if it's only €8 price difference or even more today, but there will be a significant price difference, and it will be incrementally increase, really significantly increase if we have a lower production of renewables, regardless in which zone we are. So we will see high price spikes, and that will hit the different industries, and mostly the industry in the south. So I think this argument is a killing argument, at least from the German government.
Thank you, Tobias. That's very clear. Morten, I'd just like to round off. I mean, we focus very much on Germany because that's where the controversy is. But there are other recommendations about Sweden as well, weren't there? Could you talk us through some of those and the implications for the Nordic market?
As I mentioned in the beginning, we assessed some different configurations of Sweden. That was where there was a location issue identified early on, where we both merged some bidding zones. So in the north, in the south, tried to create a bidding zone basically around Stockholm of different sizes in different configurations. In the end, we could not prove any socioeconomic benefits of making these changes when we look at how the dispatch changes versus the reduction in counter trading volumes and costs. So the decision and recommendation from the TSOs, that is to maintain the 4 bidding zones as is in Sweden. I have noticed that Svenska Kraftnät afterwards have said, well, they believe they need to look at this again. In which context that will be, I have no idea. But I'm sure we will hear more of that in the not too distant future, as well as we have, from the TSO side, recently submitted our latest technical report, which is a congestion report that we are to submit every 3 years to ASA. And that usually triggers a new bidding zone study. So the ball keeps rolling, you might say.
And the discussion keeps on going, I think. And I think certainly, I think it's been a fascinating discussion, guys. I think it's very clear. I think it's very good to get your different point of views, for, against, and also the technical side, which is very important in this debate, especially when in a week where grid resilience and grid stability has really come to the fore, and if we look at what's happening or what happened in the Iberian Peninsula, so that's absolutely critical. We'll probably do a podcast on that next week. But in the meantime, guys, thank you very much for joining Plugged In.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having us.
It's been an excellent and insightful discussion. I hope you agree, listeners. And thank you for tuning in to this episode. Our podcast episodes are released every Friday. For the latest news from Montel, please visit montelnews.com, and you can follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and other social media channels. See you next time.